get started with today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not to substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. You should always speak with your physician or other healthcare professionals before doing any fasting, changing your diet in any way, taking or adjusting any medications or supplements, or adopting any treatment plan for a health problem. The use of any other products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Any information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. All right, and now we'll get started with today's episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another The Fasting Method podcast episode. My name is Nadia Patiguana, and today I am joined by our co-host, Dr. Terri Lance. How are you doing, Terri?
I'm good, Nadia. How are you doing?
I'm all right. My voice sounds a little funny, but nothing to worry about. All good here. So today we got a big topic. I actually asked Terri if she thought this topic was too big to tackle, and nothing is too big for Terri to tackle, it seems. But what Terri did think is that we're probably going to have this is going to be like our TRE episodes, part 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 100. So today we want to talk a little bit about our relationship with food. That's a big topic. And of course, I'm going to be doing a lot more listening than talking, I think, today, Terri. So how do we even start this big topic, our relationship with food?
Well, Nadia, one of the things I've been thinking about with this topic is the number of clients and community members who have recently acknowledged they didn't realize their relationship with food was kind of an underlying piece of this whole dynamic, this whole journey. They listen to things that talk about it and they think, well, that's not me. That doesn't apply to me. And then as they really started to explore and started to think about it in this way, it really opened their eyes. And what I encourage people to think about and explore is some people might think about food as just something I do 3 or 4 or 5 or 12 times a day, or some days I don't. But really, if you think about it in relationship dynamics. It's a give and take. You seek something from it, just like you do from a partner, a best friend, a sibling, and you give something back. I think what many of us don't realize is that we are engaging with our food for reasons. And obviously, some of us know we would describe ourselves as emotional eaters. So I'm going to food to meet my emotional needs. Obviously, we also probably know that food is about sustenance, providing the nutrition that we need. So there is also a very utilitarian use of food. I need nutrients. My body needs building blocks and needs energy. But when you go beyond that and really get into the how do I interact with my food? You can probably tell as I'm saying this, I'm starting to smile because I just start to think about it, Nadia. And it's like when people say, I get excited. It's kind of like getting excited to go visit your best friend. You're getting excited to walk to the kitchen to get that particular food, or you're getting excited to go for that specific meal with your family. Think about the emotional relationship and how that plays out for you with food. How does that fit for you so far, Nadia?
Well, one thing I've learned, and I'm learning still, after 20 years of working on this topic, and it's actually more of a question for you, Terri, than anything, is that I do find that some people have more of a challenge when it comes to their relationship with food than others. And that likely has to do, of course, with our history with food, our history with our weight, our history with loads of things. So here's one thing that I have discovered, for example, and I share a lot of my own personal things in my personal journey, is I grew up thin, very lean. And I grew into, like a lot of our clients, especially the people that are categorized as TOFIs, right? Thin on the outside and fat on the inside. On the outside, I was very thin. I was a very small little kid, very thin, and I grew up into a very, very thin adult, even though I developed insulin resistance and a lot of health concerns. And eventually I even did gain weight, but I didn't have weight concerns as a child. Therefore, my relationship with food is very different than other people. If anything, I didn't like eating. So I was that picky eater. I was that kid that was forced to stay at the table and was forced to eat, even though I didn't want to eat. What I've realized, and this is why this topic is so challenging, is that even in all of that you've said makes a lot of sense, is that we all have very different relationships with food. For example, I don't have that big issue of eating all the food on my plate, leaving food on the plate, whereas my husband does, because he grew up with that whole, with parents that told them that you can never leave food on your plate. I never finished a plate in my life. I wasn't able to. And to this day, I still leave food on my plate, and I do it very comfortably. I eat until I'm satiated and then I walk away. A lot of people have trouble with that. So I'm not really telling you much except asking a little bit more from you, Terri, how you've seen that in your clients. I've definitely seen that. And that's another layer. We all have very, very different relationships with food.
Absolutely. And if you think about all of what you just described, none of that says to me your relationship with food was a good relationship. And so even though you were thin, that doesn't mean you had a good relationship with food. And so really, I want people to break out of that thought process. It is not only if you are overweight, you clearly have a poor relationship with food. Most of us have developed at least some aspects of our relationship with food that are challenging to us, that are not in our best interest.
Well, you just floored me right there. On my facial, you can probably tell by my facial expressions. That is so on point, because as I think about it, I had and still have a challenging relationship with food, with real food, because I had absolutely zero desire to eat. Therefore, my relationship with food still to this day, and I have a daughter like this, is that at times, especially if I'm not feeling my best emotionally, I'd rather not eat than eat real food. Yet if it's junk food or carbs or sugar, more sugary things, I will eat. So my daughter does this all the time. She'll say, I'm not hungry. But really what she means to say is, I don't want to eat this food. Because if I give her some processed junkier stuff, and I am like that too. So you're spot on. So even though I didn't have weight issues, even though I didn't have scale issues, I didn't have a great relationship with food because I didn't like food. Yeah. I didn't like real food. I only liked junk food.
Yeah. So in some ways, what you're describing is at times food was to be avoided for you. It was not appealing and was to be avoided. But certain things that fall into some loose description of food were very appealing to you. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about, it's a stereotype, I know, but some of us who like to date the rebels, you think sometimes of you watch romantic comedies of women who like to date the bad boys. And other people, friends, parents, neighbors are trying to set them up with the stable guy, the one who's going to provide and be present and be a good co-parent. And they have no interest. This reminds me of what you just described for you in your relationship with food. I have no interest in what's going to provide me sustenance. I want the thing that's going to wow me. I want the thing that's going to entertain me. I want the thing that's going to pack a punch. So if you really start thinking about how you interact with different foods and think about that in relationship to how you relate with people, to me, it really helps us to see it is a relationship with food. On the flip side, many people in our community and our clients that we work with describe a very different relationship with food. They almost describe it as their best friend, their companion, their confidant. When chaotic things were going on in their home or when no one else was around, they would cuddle up in bed and read while eating chocolate-covered peanuts for hours. So they paired this with a good friend, that friend that hangs out with you at night when no one's home or chaos is going on in your family. And as you mentioned earlier, so much of our relationship with food is developed in our younger years. We learn to associate the foods and the responses or the reactions we get from those foods with how we feel. I feel safe. I feel like I'm not lonely when I'm sitting here reading and eating this candy. Or I learned that I feel fulfilled somehow when I end every meal with something sweet. That's been a big theme I've heard a lot of clients and members talking about recently. And so it's almost like thinking about, I don't feel complete when I leave a party until I get to see that one friend who's really outgoing and says something really great. Otherwise, my social gathering just isn't complete. So if you start looking at how you engage with food and think of it in terms with how that looks relating with people, many of us can start to look at it a little differently. It's not just something we do several times a day. There's a dynamic that underlies it. There are reasons we use it, reasons we avoid it, and reasons we choose certain types of food rather than other types. We're going for certain things. When I was in third grade, I moved to a new school. I am sure I sat there looking around, who do I want as my friends? And I was using some kind of criteria. Oh, that person looks funny. They've said several funny things today. Maybe I want to hang out with them. Or, oh, that person knows a lot of tricks on the jungle gym. I want to hang out with that person. We're looking for certain qualities in people. And if you think about that, most of us are looking for certain qualities in foods, how we're going to feel when we use it, how we're going to feel if we don't use it.
Okay, now another tough question for you, Terri. So this has become a big topic in our community, and we actually talked about this a little bit when we talked about TRE, time restricted eating, and how of the many great benefits of TRE, one was giving us the opportunity to tackle our relationship with food. Because what we find in our community, because of fasting comes so easy to so many people, right? We find that people are undergoing what you've very spot on defined as food avoidance. And I use this all the time when I talk with people, because if you have a challenging, and you probably do, most of us probably do have some challenge with our relationship with food, then fasting just provides an opportunity to avoid that. But at some point, we have to face it, right? So how do you begin addressing your client's relationship with food? How to begin?
I'm going to use an analogy for that one, Nadia, just based on how you kind of set it up, because I think sometimes thinking about things outside of the world of food helps us to understand it a little differently. So let's say I'm in fourth grade, and every time I hang out with one of my friends, I get in trouble. We skip class, we fight, we throw things at people. Every time I hang out with them, I get in trouble. What do you think the solution that my parents, that friend's parents, maybe even the teachers, what solution do you think they're going to propose?
Stop hanging out with that person?
That's right. They're going to say, let's separate them. Let's put them in separate classes. Let's make sure they don't have recess together. This is the food avoidance topic you just brought up. I'm just going to never have exposure to it. And then I don't have to make any difficult decisions. But how realistic is it ultimately that we can just avoid food all the time? We can't. I'm going to see that friend. She rides my bus. I'm going to see her before school. I'm going to see her in the hallways. So instead, I need to learn How can I be around that friend and make different decisions? How can I be in her presence and still make different decisions? Maybe it's that I don't engage with her around certain things. Maybe she sits on that side of the room and I sit over here, and I don't make it my plan to get over there and get into trouble with her. How do I start to have her present but not get in trouble? And I think that's the piece that a lot of us need to think about with food. I'm going to go to restaurants. I'm going to be around when my family are eating meals. I'm going to eat meals. How can I begin to make decisions that don't get me into trouble, that don't interfere for me? Now, going back to this analogy, it may be true. I may need to learn she's not the friend I should play with on the playground. Because when I do that, we run amok. I'm tempted to do things. She's tempted to do things. We don't serve each other well. And this is a hard one about food, to honestly look at. There are foods that I have made very much a part of my life that don't serve me well. I get into trouble with them. They tempt me into other behaviors, whatever it is. And many people in this community know one of the books that I often recommend is a book called Breaking Up with Sugar, because many of our community members are really challenged by their use of sugar. And the author of that book, Molly Carmel, it's a great book. Now, certainly there are some things that she writes in there that don't fit for how I would encourage people to eat. She has kind of a different approach to what foods and how often to eat. But she has so many powerful things to say about learning how not to engage with sugar to change our relationship. And one of the exercises she has you do in this book is to write a breakup letter. It's kind of like that boyfriend or girlfriend that you realize is just getting you nowhere and you have to break up with them. And you say things like, "Oh, thank you, John. You've been a great friend to me. We've had lots of fun together. But what I notice is that when we hang out, I don't do my homework. And I'm mean to my other friends. And my parents are always frustrated with me. I don't think I can hang out with you anymore. Actually, I know I can't. So, John, thank you for everything, but I'm no longer please don't text me, don't email me, don't come to my locker anymore." Some of us need to do that with certain foods or groups of foods because our relationship with them leads us to problematic places. And many of us want to just moderate it. Like, I'm just going to moderate my use of sugar. It's like, I'm going to just moderate my interaction with John. It's really hard to do because what I've just described is that substance has really taken a hold in my life. So in my example, John has really taken a place in my life, and navigating it partially is very complicated. So I may actually have to break up with John if I want to change how my life is going for me. I may actually have to break up with dairy. I may actually have to break up with flour, seed oils. For some people, it's other foods. But going back to what you were describing, going to the TRE topic, pretty sure we all need to break up with, I'm going to snack and graze as my interaction with food.
Yeah, you mentioned some big ones. Nuts is another big one, nuts and seeds for people. This was actually one of the really cool, very practical, makes a lot of sense things that I learned when I did your first masterclass. Making this decision, right? Which foods do I just need to break up with, or rather foods that I cannot moderate? And that's a tough one for people. Don't you find? Even coming to that decision, not even the practical part of it, that's hard, but you've taught us we can do hard things. It's another one of my favorite Terri sayings that I love. We can do hard things, and we do hard things every single day because we're tough and we are super people. But okay, so that's a big one. And then the other thing that I find, just again, very personal, is that I have a much easier time making better decisions and making good choices and breaking up with certain foods if I'm eating and choosing others better foods. So maybe, I don't know, you have great analogies. Maybe you have these great analogies. It'd be a lot easier for you to break up with John if you have another really great friend like Larry.
That's right.
I don't know.
Just to be clear, I'm not dating John or Larry. But that's a great example. When we work on changing our relationship with food and identifying what are the problem spots, what are the problematic behaviors, and what are the problematic foods, we can't just take them away. Because for most of us, the patterns we've developed with how we eat and what we eat brings into it a component of we have learned those things as coping strategies. Do you remember when I mentioned the example of a client who would stay up late reading while no one else was home or something, and she would read, she loved to read, she would hide under the covers with chocolate-covered peanuts. That was a coping strategy that she learned to get her through an uncomfortable situation. She was a little bit scared being alone. And so cuddling up with that food and that book became a coping mechanism. And what I see a lot of us do is we recognize we've got to change some behaviors. And so it's almost like, I'm just going to eradicate them. I'm throwing them out. But what we fail to remember is at this point, they are coping strategies. If that client 30 years later is still curling up in bed at night with chocolate-covered peanuts and to read, it's a coping strategy. And what happens if we just throw away our coping strategy? Boom, we're open to all of the discomfort that we've been coping with. So as you said, we have to find other healthier coping strategies. Let's use the example of, or going back to the example of food. That might mean I need to use healthier food choices, or it may mean I need to use other behaviors besides eating. But I can't just have no coping strategies. We don't do well when we have no coping strategies. So you are very spot on there, Nadia. It's about replacing coping strategies with healthier, more productive coping strategies, not just throwing out the ones that we've deemed as bad habits.
Absolutely. So a lot of this, and this is very particular maybe to food and a little bit different than our relationships with people, but a lot of this has a sort of a combination between emotions and physiology. I talk a lot about physiology personally because that's something I understand a lot better than emotions. And what I find, of course, is that, and I talk about the insulin beast, is that when I'm in a hyperinsulinemic state, so when I'm in a state of high insulin, whether that be because I'm stressed or because I haven't slept well, or because I've been on holiday and been eating more carbs, been eating later, there's a number, or I'm in PMS, my PMS week, which is a hyperinsulinemic state, or for, whatever other situation. When I'm in a higher insulin state, it's a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging to make good food choices. In a hyperinsulinemic state, as I often joke, when the insulin beast moves into my house, it's really hard to tame that beast or to starve that beast. I just keep feeding it, right? Or I want to keep feeding it. And so my way physiologically is to understand that I'm in this high insulin state, or I'm in this high stress state, which often puts me in a high insulin state. And so I have to use my smarts, my brain, because my willpower just will not do, right? And I have to say to myself, okay, I need to deflate or tame that beast by eating these fast foods. That's what I do. That's my strategy. I know that just from years of experience, and that's what I teach people to do. It's sort of my repair, my recovery plan, my bridge to get myself to a place where I do more easily, without as much effort, make better food choices. So that's been part of my journey to work on my relationship with food, is just understanding that in certain situations, I do crave certain things, or I feel weaker, and I end up feeling like I'm going to cave. But if I put myself in a better physiological state, if I eat better for a few days, and it does unfortunately take a few days, it doesn't just get fixed in one meal, one day, 1 hour. But if for a few days I make a list, that's why I love elimination diets. It just seems so much easier to tackle, something that I'm going to do for a couple of days or I'm going to do for a month than to say for life. But really, I do hear you talk a lot about making these decisions more long-term, right? Creating your own my list of foods. People talk about my list, my foods all the time, and they get that from you, right, Terri?
Absolutely. So making it part of your identity. So whether I'm PMSing or not, this is how I eat. And there's a little bit of variety. Like you said, there might be particular stressful times where you eat more in the category of fat fasting foods. And then other times during that same month where you're not leaning as heavily on those fat fasting foods and you're choosing other healthy foods. Another thought I had as you described that, Nadia, is I often encourage people during those highly stressful times, recovering from something, illness, high stress at work, traumas in the family, anything, looking at the food choices. So maybe using more fat fasting foods, but also increasing or decreasing your fasting. So if I'm doing 2 meals a day, alternating with 1 meal, I actually encourage people maybe for a few days, they may do best eating 3 meals. Satisfy that, lower that cortisol by having good, healthy foods a little more frequently until that stressful time has passed. So you talked about adjusting the foods, and I think there's also the potential to adjust the fasting. Eating does tend to have a calming effect. That doesn't mean we want to eat 17 times in a day, but maybe for a couple of days during a highly stressful time or during PMS, maybe I need to eat 3 meals instead of 2. And I can divvy up my food differently until that cortisol level has come down, that stress level has come down, and then I can get back into my alternating 24s or even into my 42s. But if you think about it, I'm going to keep going back to those personal interaction things with relationship with people. When I go through something really hard, most of us do better if we reach out to people and get ourselves some support. So that would be like, I'm going to eat a little more frequently, but I'm going to get the right support. I'm not just going to invite anyone to come hang out with me. I have certain people that I know give me the messages that I need, have that energy level and presence that is comforting to me during those really difficult times. So, like I said, I don't just go hang out with random people. I choose carefully. So if your stress level is up and you need to eat, choosing carefully what things support you best. And they're usually not the things that lower animal part of your brain is telling you it wants. It is still going to be seeking those old habits of things that bring instant relief or numbing. Generally, for most of us, that would be highly processed foods.
Okay, so as we predicted, we could go on forever on this topic. This is one of those to be continued, part 2 and many more to come. But as we have mentioned, Megan has mentioned this, we have been getting a ton of questions from you guys, which we truly appreciate. We love answering your questions. And so Terri and I have decided that at the end of each of our episodes together, we're going to try to answer at least a couple of your questions. So we've picked out one question each to answer today. Even though this is a hot topic on your relationship with food, we're still going to throw in a couple of Q&As in there. So Terri, you want to take that first one there?
Sure. So the question is, can you explain how to lose the last 10 pounds and then maintenance once you've reached your goal? The fasting is easy. These last 10 pounds are not. I also have no idea how to maintain. I don't want to keep yo-yoing. Oftentimes, I know our questions that we choose could be full episodes and multiple episodes, and maintenance is a really big topic in our community. So the first thing with those last 10 pounds, I would say, is patience. the last 10 pounds don't come off as easily for most of us as the first 10 pounds. And so consistency and patience, knowing it's going to take a while. It's not going to come off at the same pace as, you might be someone who's lost a significant amount of weight and there were months where it went pretty quickly. That's unlikely to happen at this point. You are probably going to have to tweak some things you've been maybe a little more generous about. You may need to tighten up a little bit because your body has really kind of reached some new set points. And so you may need to make some adjustments. But the big piece of this question I think is really important is about maintenance. And again, this is a topic, Nadia, you and I and Megan could talk about for months. But I think the most important thing with maintenance is a mindset. Oftentimes we think maintenance is this goal point, like I'm going to do all this work and then I'm going to get to maintenance. And many of us still fall into the trap of, and then I'm just going to go back to doing what I used to do. And that, I guarantee, will not create maintenance. Instead, to have a mindset that the skills I have been building are now my lifelong skills. And maintenance means I keep doing the same things. I might adjust it a little bit. So let's say, for example, during my fasting journey, I've been doing pretty intense fasting, 3 42-hour fasts a week. During maintenance, probably don't need to do 3 42s, but I might do 1 42 and 2 24s for a month or so and see how that does. And then I might roll it back to 3 24s. And then I might roll back and do some 16-30 protocols. So it's adjusting down that dial of intensity that I always mention, but it's not stopping. Going back to the food. If I, at maintenance, decide to reintroduce a bunch of the problematic foods, the things that were getting me into trouble, the problematic relationship foods, I'm going to recreate the same problematic patterns. So maybe it means I bring in a dessert, if that was one of my problematic things, that I bring it in once a month. But if I bring that back in 4 times a week, I'm not going to maintain the progress that I've made. So the mindset that maintenance in many ways is just a dialing back of intensity a little bit, but it's keeping all of those same skills going. And I had one client recently who I actually did an episode for this with her, Heather Schucker, and she actually said, maintenance is where some of the hard work actually starts, because now it's really taking this on as this is forever. I'm going to be doing these things in healthy ways forever, not for 6 months, not for 18 months, but I'm committing to this long term. So changing your mindset about maintenance, because most of us have a negative connotation of maintenance because of the way we used to approach it. It was, I do this really hard dieting plan for 6 months and then I stop. And then we couldn't maintain.
Brilliant. Couldn't agree more. All right, so here's my question. I am 43 years old and was diagnosed with early menopause at 39. Needless to say, it has been extremely difficult for me to lose weight. I would like to understand more what happens in terms of hormones when women are menopausal. What is it about the hormonal profile of menopausal women that makes it so difficult to lose weight? And to what extent will fasting help improve this profile? Well, this is a big question. And I actually address this, as Terri would say, you actually need a masterclass to address your question. So I'm going to do my best here. I have actually done a whole masterclass on this. So has Megan. So has our whole team, the 4 of us together. Pretty much, this is our main focus. These are the main people that we're working with. But I'm going to try to do my best here to leave you with some thoughts. First of all, in our community, we do see a lot of women who are either diagnosed or believe that they were in early menopause, only because conditions such as PCOS and other insulin-resistant reproductive concerns, and this is a big topic. Basically, what I'm saying is that insulin resistance or being insulin resistant will put you in a situation hormonally, basically hyperinsulinemia, being in a hyperinsulinemic state will in some cases put you on a spectrum of a condition such as PCOS where your period may stop either for many months or just become very irregular. So a lot of times people believe that they are in early menopause, but what you might be going through, and I'm not saying that this is this particular person, but many of you may often wonder whether or not you are in menopause very early on, but you may have or be on the spectrum, very sort of severe spectrum of insulin resistance, such as frank type of PCOS, and therefore your period may stop completely or just be very irregular. So it's first of all understanding, and we write about this, Dr. Fung and I did, we wrote about this in our book, The PCOS Plan. It's understanding that insulin has this tremendous and very powerful impact on your reproductive hormones. Knowing that, then we can answer the second part of your question, which is, what is it about menopause that makes it so difficult for people to lose weight? Or rather, why is it that some women, even those that haven't had weight concerns pre-menopause, start to have weight concerns post-menopause? In order to answer that, you have to sort of understand your reproductive hormones. These are pretty important. For women, our two most important or prominent reproductive hormones are estrogen and progesterone. And basically, as you menstruate, your body cycles through these two hormones, right? There's half of your cycle, you're in an estrogen dominant phase, and the other half of your cycle, you're in this progesterone dominant phase. During your reproductive years, during your menstrual years, a lot of women still have trouble losing weight or struggle with their body composition. But during half of your cycle, during this more estrogen dominant phase, you have this hormonal advantage where if you're doing the right sort of dietary approaches and fasting is a little bit easier, you do tend to lose a bit more weight. So the important message here is to realize that during your reproductive years, you do have this hormonal advantage in that you can lose weight and you do lose a bit of weight, at least during half of your cycle. As you become menopausal or postmenopausal, you lose this very important hormonal advantage and you tend to go up that insulin resistance spectrum. So some women tend to gain more weight, other women tend to express other metabolic syndrome conditions such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease. None of this is to say that you can't lose weight or that postmenopausal women lose less weight or, can't lose weight, lose less weight. We just lose weight differently now. So we have to understand our reproductive hormones first, that advantage. And once you lose that advantage, what do you have going for you? You have fasting. And I talk about this a lot in our, especially the Q&As that I do, the webinars that I do about women and fasting. I talk about our menstrual cycles, our reproductive years, but I also talk about our postmenopausal years and some fasting protocols for postmenopausal women. Basically, you can't use your cycle anymore as a schedule for fasting, so you create your own fasting cycle. You basically want to use fasting as your best friend. Fasting is a postmenopausal woman's best friend when it comes to weight loss, when it comes to tackling insulin resistance. You want to start with TRE, of course, and then you want to build up and create some fasting protocols that are going to be more useful towards helping you to lose weight. More often, we're talking about things like alternate day fasting type protocols. But there is a very big relationship. It's a very interesting relationship. I also talk a little bit about metabolic age and how you can reverse that post-menopause and how fasting, again, is your best friend when it comes to that. So to be continued, a lot of details here, a lot of resources in our community for this if you want to watch some previously recorded webinars on this topic. All right. Thank you so much, Terri, for everything that you taught us today, particularly about our relationship with food. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. We will see you back here next week. Have a great one, everyone, and happy fasting. Bye, Terri.
Bye, Nadia. Take good care, everybody.